I used to live in the moment all the time. And that caused me to think, oh, well, this is it. This is the end. Just lived angrily in prison. I knew I was done. My life was over. It was, at that point, in my perspective, too late. I was in prison. I was going to be there for the rest of my life.
And those places are dangerous places. It's about survival from one day to the next. You never know what's going to happen.
Active rehabilitation doesn't really occur in prison. You have to teach people how to live. It's all about money. That's the sad part about it. Money runs everything.
We don't have to be just down and out. You know, the poor beaten Indian. That's not us.
I think society has to look at what does justice really mean.
Healing isn't easy. It never was. But it sure is doable. And there is no such thing as impossible.
There's no excuse for my actions, but I've learned that there's reasons.
Daryl Kent likes to drive.
We're going to go downtown Ottawa. It's the road I normally travel.
The 60-year-old takes pride in his deep red Nissan Altima. He better. He's currently working overnight weekend shifts to pay for it. But Kent says it's worth the freedom it brings.
Driving, it reminds me of when I was in the pen. I used to see movies, TV shows, and I'd see familiar places, and I think of the times that I would have liked to have been out there. Just being in the city. So being in the city here, everything's new to me, so this city. So I just enjoy being out here. And it's my field.
Before Kent can finish his thought, a call from his parole officer interrupts.
Oh, I was just going to say, oh, you don't sound pleased.
Kent learns that due to a parole violation, he has about an hour and a half before he needs to go under house arrest. The violation? Driving beyond his allowed 100-kilometer radius. Kent says he went about 8 kilometers over to visit a friend.
I may have broken the law, but that doesn't make me a liar.
Last year, Daryl Kent was released after 38 years in prison. While at Stony Mountain Prison in 1984, he was one of the masterminds behind a riot. He was 21 years old.
So I recruited a couple of guys to help me. One of the guys whose first language was Cree, he didn't know what hostage meant. He thought it meant kill. So when the scuffle started, he started stabbing.
2 correctional officers, Joseph Wendell and Werner Friesen, were murdered. It's one of the deadliest days in the history of Canadian corrections.
I know those 2 guys were good people. They treated everybody with respect. And it was just, it's just that they were there.
Kent was convicted of first-degree murder and manslaughter for the role he played in their deaths. 54-year-old Wendell left behind a wife and 3 children, while 33-year-old Friesen was married with a young family, including a 2-year-old daughter and a wife who was 6 months pregnant.
There's nothing I can say. I understand their anger. They have that anger still with me. Oh, excuse me. The other part that struck me the most was Friesen's daughter, the little girls. So I know what it's like to grow up without parents, so that hurt me. And that was kind of what changed my life.
When he was 5 years old, Kent lost both of his parents and an older sister in a car accident. Raised by his grandparents, he says it was in school when the troubles began. Originally from Broken Head Ojibwe Nation in Manitoba, he found himself subjected to racist taunts at the nearby, mostly white, school.
The school administrators, the principal, was siding with the people who would instigate making racial comments or starting fights. They'd lose the fights a lot of times, and then we would get the strap. The Indian kids would get the strap.
Me, right here.
From there, he describes carrying a rage that always simmered near the surface, waiting for provocation.
Out of anger, I went to the basement of the school there, the white school, and I tried to set it on fire. There was a little fire started, the alarms went off, but it went out.
From there, Kent's life becomes one institution after another. An abusive foster care home, youth detention, a life of crime to feed his substance abuse, which then lands him in provincial jail. Then, Stony Mountain, an overcrowded prison with a history that is long and notorious.
There was a lot of hostility there on the part of between the staff and the inmates, and there was a lot of assaults.
Kent has spent the last year living at a halfway house. Judging from his parole record, he's adjusted well. But the last thing he wants to be seen as is a Corrections Canada success story.
Prison is a huge dysfunctional environment, not just with prisoners, but staff as well.
Kent isn't alone when he says the correctional system is broken.
Why is it failing is that we've been looking at the wrong, we've been asking the wrong questions and looking at the wrong solutions.
Dr. Vicky Chartrand is a criminologist and a professor at Bishop's University. For 25 years, she has been speaking with inmates and visiting prisons.
I'm not condoning the violence and their hurtful and harmful acts. I think that accountability is really important, but that the majority of people who do go into prison aren't having their basic needs met, whether, in terms of dealing with post-traumatic stress and histories of violence and trauma. Those basic needs aren't being met, and in fact, in prison, it's actually exacerbating them.
According to many, among the worst is the Special Handling Unit. Despite its innocuous-sounding name, people who have been to the SHU, or SHU, say it's anything but. Daryl Kent did a spell there following his murder and manslaughter convictions.
A prison for prisoners, there's nothing there.
And judging from some more recent inmates, not much has changed.
I wouldn't wish it on anyone. It's a very dangerous place. Worst of all, hell.
Located about 50 kilometers north of Montreal, the SHU is Canada's only super maximum prison. It's where they send people who are considered too dangerous for maximum security. Situated within a larger complex called the Regional Reception Center, it's a prison within a prison.
I've been stabbed there and I didn't deserve it. We're basically locked in our cells all day. It's like psychological abuse. Nothing but sit there and think. Slowly pick away at your mental capacity to kind of break you down and just make you lose your mind.
Tyler and David are part of a class action lawsuit against the SHU. The allegations they're making have not been tested in court. At the request of their lawyer, we've hidden their identities and changed their names so as not to jeopardize their case.
On prend les détenus qu'on juge les plus problématiques, qui ont les plus grosses difficultés, on les met tous ensemble en offrant pas de programme de réinsertion sociale, pas de suivi avec les intervenants, avec les travailleurs sociaux, avec les agents de libération conditionnelle, pas vraiment de suivi psychologique. Puis on les enferme le plus qu'on peut en cellule, puis après on s'entend à ce que soudainement, ils réussissent à travailler sur les différentes problématiques qu'ils ont.
Marie-Claude Lacroix is one of the lawyers behind the class action. Currently, there are 117 plaintiffs, the majority of whom are Indigenous. They are each asking for $550,000 in damages, with an additional $800 to $1,000 per day spent in the SHU. Some of the complaints they are bringing to court are at least 20 to 21 hours a day in a cell with little light from a small window, no meaningful human contact, few programs, especially for Indigenous inmates.
Like smudging and stuff like this, that's once in a while. So like you're an animal, okay? So they put you in a cage and the alder's on the other side. So you have bars in between you and there's a little like cubby with plexiglass he puts the shell through, and yeah, it's very degrading and there's no You feel like you're subhuman.
Corrections Canada declined our request to go inside the SHU, but Senator Kim Pate has been. She wasn't impressed. She says that because inmates spend long hours in SHU cells isolated from others, it's akin to solitary confinement, something Canadian courts have made illegal.
Many people with expertise in this area have said if you go into isolation and you don't already have mental health issues, you will have mental health issues fairly quickly.
You need to recognize that the special handling unit is a temporary solution to a risk.
Marty Maltby is in charge of Indigenous initiatives for the Correctional Services of Canada. While he says there could be potential to provide more services, he emphasizes that the SHU exists to minimize the chance of staff or others being hurt in other, lower security prisons.
While it's important for us to provide service and support at the special handling unit, and we do, I would argue that we put a lot of also effort, a significant amount of effort, into actually moving them out of the special handling unit. So what we have seen is a significant decrease in the use of that unit.
By law, every case of the SHU is up for review every 4 months. But many have spent a year or more there, while the cutoff for other forms of isolation in prison is now 15 days.
Je pense pas qu'on a besoin d'un USD. Je pense qu'on a besoin d'offrir des services pour gérer ces individus-là, puis les aider à diminuer le risque qu'ils peuvent représenter. Puis je pense que ces services-là peuvent être offerts ailleurs qu'en USD.
However, there are places for Indigenous healing in Canada's prison system, where offenders can go to not only leave their physical prison, but the one within themselves.
I want to go live a good life and make up for my mistakes.
But who gets to benefit from these places, and how, is a whole other issue. After the break, we visit the polar opposite of the supermax.
It's helped me to heal some of my traumas from my childhood that I kind of hadn't really dealt with as fully as I thought I did.
We need huge amount of resource to be reallocated from Correctional Service of Canada to Indigenous communities and groups to trying to improve those correctional outcomes that are so terrible.
Technically, Wasuskun Healing Center is only about 60 kilometers north of the SHU, but ideologically, they're about as far as you can get.
What we're trying to do is make sure that these guys, when they come out with a toolbox, I would say, of good medicines.
Healing isn't easy. It isn't easy. It never was. But it sure is doable, and there is no such thing as impossible.
Normand Guilbeault and Dennis Nicholas are part of a spiritual advisory team here. Every morning, a meeting is held in this medicine room with both provincial and federal inmates nearing the end of their sentences.
It's not a place where you just can't do your time, the last part of your time, and just cruise along. I'm sorry. It's going to be some hard work.
Nationally, Wasuskun is one of 6 independently run healing centers, but it's also a minimum security prison. Except here they call the inmates residents. Ricky Abram is one of them.
My stay here has been great. It's helped me to help heal some of my traumas from my childhood that I kind of hadn't really dealt with as fully as I thought I did, because we were able to deal with it through like counseling and through ceremonies that the elders provide here that I wasn't getting access to in regular institutions.
Abram's story is a familiar one here. Intergenerational trauma passed along from residential schools, absentee parents, substance abuse.
It hurts. It hurts to look back and to see the damage I've caused. And I don't want to do that, and I don't want anybody else to do that and learn their lesson after it's too late. Because you can't take your mistake back. And there's no excuse for my actions, but I've learned that there's reasons.
Abram has spent 20 years in prison for first-degree murder. The 47-year-old Oneida man spoke to APTN on the condition that we would not go into details about the very serious nature of his crime.
I had to stop and turn and look in the mirror and do a real deep inventory on why I think led to me to go down this road of negativity and darkness and drug use and alcoholism, and finally culminating in, the ultimate horrendous act of violence. I knew something. I had to fix that. I had to heal that.
Dennis Nicholas is a Mohawk elder. Amongst all the sweetgrass and sage and medicine in this room, he says one of his favorite items is a cracked wood carving that a former resident made.
And then he showed me, he goes, look what happened. He goes, it cracked and look what happened. He says, it's spoiled, He basically just wanted to forget about it. I looked at it, I said, no, the complete opposite. I said, everything for a reason, and I said, it has become a very powerful teacher. This is who we are. This is where we are. I said, this is the stuff that we work on for the rest of our days.
Abram has spent much of the last year here learning ceremony from Nicholas. As the possibility of parole draws nearer, Abram has a clear vision of what he'd like to do when he gets out.
I want to help people to heal, to be able to let go of stuff that's holding us down, that's been holding our people down for generations. And that to show them that if I can do it, anybody can do it.
But how many Indigenous inmates are getting help at healing centers like this? Correctional watchdog Ivan Zinger says the vacancy rate is at 40%.
I'm of the view that given the track record of corrections, that we should consider looking at alternative options. We need huge amount of resource to be reallocated from Correctional Service of Canada to Indigenous communities and groups to try to improve those correctional outcomes that are so terrible.
Among the ugly stats, Indigenous people have a 65% recidivism rate. Meanwhile, a recent report shows that independently run healing lodges like Wasaskun make a difference. Specifically, offenders who completed Indigenous cultural programs at a healing lodge had a 54% lower risk to return to prison. Corrections Canada-run lodges clock in at 29%.
The star blanket that we brought back from one of our institutions in the Prairie region.
Marty Malpe of Corrections Canada says the pandemic made getting people into healing lodges harder. But he says that's changing.
Over the last few months, we've seen an increase, a significant increase, I would say, in most of our healing lodges. Hopefully, I would say by next year, this time next year or if not earlier, we'll see them as full as possible.
On a un professeur qui vient ici. Ça avait une école. Ici, c'est l'école.
After a career in corrections, Dominique Tremblay says she was supposed to retire. Instead, she came back to help run Wasaskun, where she worked earlier in her career.
C'est la salle à dîner communautaire.
Among the challenges she's facing is that they are currently running at 50% capacity, and since they get funding from corrections per resident, it means they only have half of their ideal budget.
Ça implique surtout l'achat de bois, exemple, ils font des feux à tous les jours, des feux sacrés. Ben, le bois à 100$, la corde de bois, qui c'est 15 résidents ou qui c'est 30 résidents, il y a des feux à tous les jours d'allumer.
Wasaskun is also in need of renovations, large and small. They recently had to go to the bank to ask for a loan to fix their roof.
I call it Algonquin Majestic Traveler. That's what I call it.
Meanwhile, inmates can be on the waiting list to come here from 6 months to 2 years.
Tous les jours, on reçoit des applications de détenus qui sont dans des pénitenciers, qui pourraient être transférés ici, qui ont été acceptés ici, qu'on attend leur transfert. Pourquoi que ça bloque? On ne le sait pas encore.
One issue that may hold male inmates back is that in order to go to a healing lodge, they must be classified as minimum risk. But in 2018, the Supreme Court ruled that the tool used to decide security classifications discriminated against Indigenous people. And last year, the Auditor General released a report stating that the process for assigning security classifications results in disproportionately high numbers of Indigenous and Black offenders being placed in maximum security institutions. And that, when the process does determine an Indigenous inmate is minimum risk, correction staff are 13% more likely to override the risk rating in order to place Indigenous men in higher security. For Indigenous women, it was 23% higher. Corrections Canada says they have put into place an automatic review process for security overrides by staff. As for the much maligned security classification tool,
we engaged with the University of Regina to develop a project that's going to look at that classification process overall.
The research towards a new classification process began in 2019 and is expected to take 5 years.
Good morning and welcome.
Zinger says his office first raised the classification issue in 2002.
The inertia and inability of the service to reform itself is such that you have to wait decades to see changes. And all during that time, we have to remember that Indigenous people were probably overclassified and sent to higher security than necessary.
With a budget of nearly $300 billion, the heat is on Corrections Canada to address Indigenous recidivism. Recently, calls for some of that money to go to other resources have only started to get louder.
I won't debate whether or not we have significant resources dedicated to this, but I will say that I think, again, part of the challenge we have, particularly when it comes to recidivism pieces, is also that we need to work with communities and other partners to develop better strategies to keep people in community longer and safer.
This is a picture of me at 1993 in Edmonton Max.
Daryl Kent may have spent most of his life behind bars, but he has another name now, one that he hopes guides him in his new life, Kiwatano Inine.
It was given to me in a ceremony requested by my eldest brother. It means North Wind Man.
The North Wind is known for being cold. Often spoken in reference to a shifting of seasons, it is a wind of change.
You feel the north wind when it blows, right? Since I've been in prison, have developed my voice, have learned how to use my voice for, at times, stupid things, to create havoc or to hurt someone's feelings. But I've also gone through that stage where I've learned to use my voice to express the positive things in life.
This is who we are. This is where we are. I said, this is the stuff that we work on.
As a Wesleyan graduate, Kent credits Elder Dennis Nicholas for his renewed focus on positivity. Going forward, he's hoping to get into a trade and to visit some family he hasn't seen in decades back on Broken Head, Ojibwe Nation.
They have developed on their own without me, but I got to catch up to them, with them.
For now, the North Wind Man will keep on moving, driving. He'll just need to stay within his 100-kilometer radius for a little while longer.